when a murder is discovered.
And what you have is a young lady who is in a suitcase which has been deposited on a railway embankment, covered over by twigs and other foliage.
It doesn't just destroy one life.
And then you find out what really happened. You read it in books, you see it in TV shows and everything else. It's really tough.
It tears communities apart.
You can still speak to residents now, and they say they've never got over it, what happened to a young man in the midst of their little community here.
It's up to the police to not only solve the mystery.
That was our hope, that where we were going was going to provide us with a treasure chest of information.
And track down the killer, but bring them to justice.
I couldn't understand why. Why would somebody do such a terrible thing?
In this episode, a young athlete is shot dead on the street.
Sulu was the perfect guy. They called him the gentle giant. You get some moron driving by, he fires one shot and hits him right in the face, kills him right there, boom.
Meet the murder detectives.
Without this young girl calling, I wouldn't really have had much to do other than possibly eat a donut or have some coffee.
Who reveal how they caught the killer.
I was trying to figure out why you shot him, you know?
Keep your voice down.
In the Central Valley of California, surrounded by farmland and almost 100 miles east of San Francisco, lies the city of Modesto. On March 19, 1994, a 22-year-old man was shot dead in the road by a gunman in a passing car.
This murder happened on a Saturday morning, an early Saturday morning, a little after 2 a.m. And I had gone to work Friday morning at 7 o'clock, and I was getting ready to go home when they said, no, not so fast, we've got something else for you. And they said a murder investigation had just started on Orangeburg Avenue, and they sent me over there.
John Bueller was the detective in charge. He headed downtown to the scene of the shooting.
When I got here that night, of course, the street lights were going, and I could see rather good, but I had to park down around the corner because they had the yellow crime scene tape up that was keeping all traffic out, so there was nobody driving through here. And so when I walked in, I went by one of the uniformed officers, he signed me into the crime scene, and I walked up towards us, coming up from behind me.
The other detectives had arrived before me, and they were already starting, and I quickly caught up with what was going on, which really wasn't difficult because there wasn't much to catch up on. In this case, it was right on the sidewalk where the shooting had occurred, and the shot had been fired from the street in the lane going in the opposite direction. So the shot came across 3 lanes of traffic as the car was in motion.
Detective Dick Rydenor was John's second in command. The victim had been identified, but as yet, very little was known about him.
I heard that the guy was a basketball player, and he was here doing some kind of show thing at a church, and that he was walking over off of Orangeburg Avenue, and somebody came by and shot him in a drive-by shooting.
The victim had been with 2 friends who told officers he was called Sulu Palega. The 3 of them had been in a convenience store buying some food. Daryl Farnsworth, a local journalist, picked up the story.
Sulu was like the perfect guy. They called him the gentle giant. I guess he was about 6'4", 6'5", 250 pounds, and he was in a Christian basketball tournament. That's why he was here to begin with. And then you get some moron driving by. He fires one shot from the rear seat of the car and hits him right in the face. Kills him right there, boom.
It was a shock to everyone involved that Sulu had been shot in this part of town.
I know Orangeburg Avenue because I live pretty close to over there. It's got a couple of motels, got some eating restaurants. Not a problem of any particular kind. so it's actually not a bad area.
I couldn't believe that he was shot where he was shot. They were walking back to their motel, and it's just the last place you'd think somebody would kill you.
For John and his team, this area had become a crime scene, and as such, they needed to search for any evidence that might lead to Sulu's killer.
Just about any time a detective goes to a murder scene, we're kind of the late ones getting there. Usually the first people there are the uniformed officers in the police cars, and then of course the ambulance personnel. But in this case, they wanted to save Sulu. They wanted to save his life. So they cut his clothes off partially to get some vital signs, and they loaded him in the ambulance quickly and took him to a nearby hospital. By the time I got to the scene, I already learned that Sulu had passed away, that he had died from his wound.
John and his team examined what had been found at the location of the shooting.
And one of the officers had circled with tire crayon, it's like a yellow crayon for marking tires, he had circled a little thing in the middle of the street over here in the turn lane. And I walked over there because they had told me what it was, but I just confirmed it was that 10mm shell casing from the pistol.
There were no witnesses that could give us any specific detail about the car. I knew our best shot at getting any type of information was going to be from Sulu's two companions.
Sulu and his two friends, Michael and Anthony, had arrived from San Francisco and knew nobody in town.
What I learned from both Michael and Anthony was horrifying. They had left their motel earlier and had wanted to get some snacks at a nearby convenience store.
Sulu and Michael and Anthony were walking towards us, but they were on the other side of the street. Now, as they were approaching us, they were coming from the north, which is where the convenience store was, where they'd picked up their snacks. So they were on the other side of the street coming towards us, because behind me, around the curve, is the motel where they were staying at just down the road there. So all walking distance, easy walking distance.
It was around the same time that the bars and the nightclubs were closing. So it was about 2 in the morning. And as they were walking down, they had no idea that this was coming to them. But they heard somebody yell, "Hey," from a passing car.
Michael and Anthony and Sulu turned to look like, who's yelling at us? And that's when he stuck the gun out the window and fired that one unaimed shot that could have gone anywhere. It could have gone across the freeway into the buildings. It could have gone into a tree, a bush, the sidewalk. It could have gone anywhere, but it didn't. That bullet went to Sulu's eye, and that's what killed him instantly, right across the street from where we are right now, taking him away from us.
John learned more about Sulu from his two friends.
Sulu was one of those unique people that was a pretty pure person through and through. He came from a great family in San Francisco. He was down in Modesto just by chance playing in a charity Christian basketball tournament.
The charity basketball tournament had been organised by the Modesto Church. One of its leaders was Ginny.
The basketball rally was formed originally to help kids have something to do to keep them off the street. And it was just unfortunate that something like this had to happen when a team from out of town was here.
They were told about the shooting the following day.
And they told us that the fellow from San Francisco had been killed in a drive-by shooting, and I think I was speechless.
The detectives had very little to build on to solve this case, but they had years of experience behind them.
We knew John Bueller. He was a best friend to one of our neighbor boys growing up. We had a lot of respect for him.
John had investigated many murders, but Sulu's was different.
For a policeman, this was a great town to work in because there was always something happening, there was always something interesting, but unfortunately, everything that was interesting and everything that was happening usually had some tragedy attached to it.
Understanding the life of the victim is something that the police will always do as part of their investigation. That'll be the starting point. And that's why when there's no relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, that makes that difficult, because where's the link?
It didn't sound, from the early information that I had, that he was engaged in any horseplay or any type of activity that would contribute to him being shot.
He wanted to be a fireman. He was very religious. He was just the kind of guy, if you had a sister or something like that, you would want her to date.
The night of the shooting, the investigation had only just begun, but with no witnesses, John only had one lead.
The best thing that I had going were the two friends that were with Sulu when he was shot. And I was hoping that they would know there was some connection.
John asked the friends to painstakingly talk through every moment before and after the shooting.
They didn't have a good description of the car. They didn't have a license number on the car. They didn't have a description of the occupants of the car, and they couldn't even tell me the make of the car. And they weren't even much help on the color. They described a darker color, but they couldn't even zero in on that. So they told me what happened, but they didn't have specifics that would really help us.
The first few hours are key in any murder investigation. But in this case, detectives still had very little to work on.
It's getting early morning hours, close to 6 in the morning by the time we finished up. And of course, like anybody who's been up for nearly 24 hours, I was tired at the time. But the one thing about cases like this is you can't stop gathering information that you might lose because you're tired. So you have to keep working.
This is probably one of the most difficult murder cases to investigate because there's very little to go on. There's going to be a lot of obstacles in the police's way investigating this type of case, and they have to rely on kind of good old-fashioned policing.
Well, you have to be dedicated to the job. You have to turn every rock. So you just got to keep digging and digging and digging.
There didn't seem to be any obvious motive as to why these three guys had been targeted.
This case was shocking because it was so brazen. It was in public, it was at night, and it was not showing any particular reason. There was nothing logical about this case on why this guy, why at this time, and why at this location would he be targeted.
John and his team were now desperately looking for anything that could give them a lead to finding the killer.
It's the only evidence I had. One shell casing, clothing that wasn't going to help me, and a pool of blood on the side of the road. And of course, at that time, it just made me think, we're probably not going to solve this. It didn't mean we weren't going to work it. It didn't mean we weren't going to try hard and give it everything we had. But I didn't have the things that I've seen in other murder cases that puts you in a mindset from the start knowing this is solvable, we can find this guy. We didn't have that here.
In Modesto, California, in the early hours of Saturday morning, San Francisco basketball player Sulu Palega had been shot in the eye and killed by someone driving by.
At 10:30 in the morning on Saturday morning, 8 hours after Sulu had been shot, we really didn't have anything to go on.
Lead detective John Bueller was struggling to find a motive for the killing.
I wished I would have had a different type of crime scene. I didn't have that. It would have been nice if I would have had some witness. I didn't have that. Because if I don't have a witness and I don't have physical evidence that will help me determine who the killer is, it's a real whodunit, and we just have to rely on luck at that point to solve it.
I don't think people had any theories. They were just in shock, wondering, how could this happen? And to this guy? This guy's not a gangbanger or anything like that as we started putting out information about him.
We knew that Sulu's family had been notified by the San Francisco authorities, so there was no reason for us to go up there at that time. I left that morning not too optimistic that this case was going to be solved.
As soon as the police arrived at the scene, they were probably assuming that it was a gang-related situation. They were probably assuming that when they found out who the person was, they were going to identify, what was going on. When they looked into his background, they would have been really surprised that he would have been the victim. So very quickly, they would have determined that it was a case of mistaken identity.
It was big news in Modesto. Everybody was following it, wondering who could have done it. I mean, car drives by slow, guys from out of town, which was surprising. because we have shootings and drive-by shootings.
If it was difficult for the police to understand how Sulu had become the victim of a shooting that night, it was even harder for his parents.
His mother did not want him to come to Modesto that weekend. I don't know if she had a premonition or just what, and that really hurt when I heard that. I have daughters, and I can't even imagine.
Detective John Bueller had been working all night, and mid-morning on Saturday, he headed home for some rest.
I was probably home in bed by 11:30, then got up late that afternoon, showered, and I was going to go back down to the office. But it was when I was getting ready to go into work that I learned that this girl had called and wanted to talk to me about this murder. And that was the one break that we needed to start going in the right direction.
A woman called the police station claiming that she believed the killer had come to her house in the early hours of the morning.
She saw on the television news the reporting of the young basketball star that was shot in a drive-by shooting in Modesto. So she immediately connected what had happened at 3 in the morning, about 14 hours earlier, with what she was hearing on the TV at that time. She picked up the phone, she called Modesto Police Department, and then I got the call to come and meet her.
The first 48 hours of the investigation, things started clicking because that lady had called and said, hey, I think I know somebody you might want to talk to.
Witnesses are hugely important to homicide investigations, and I think people perhaps don't realise how valuable they still are because we have so much science and technology.
This is the building that used to have the restaurant called the Sizzler. Now, the Sizzler restaurant was where the waitress worked that gave us the break that made this case. And what she told me was that earlier that morning, about 3 in the morning, not even an hour after the murder happened, a guy named Bobby came to her house. He had 2 friends with him, and he wanted her to get in her car and take Bobby and his 2 friends back to recover something. Well, she kind of liked Bobby. She'd met him before. She knew him from the bars in Modesto. So they got into her car and they drove back down the road a few miles south of here. And at the side of the road, there was a kiwi stand. And there in the bushes by that kiwi stand was a gun in a gun case, a handgun. Bobby got back in the car with his handgun, and this waitress recognized what it was immediately. And because of that, she started getting fearful. Well, as she continued to drive, she heard the boys talking about, I hope I killed the right guy, I hope I shot the right guy, things like this. Now she was starting to get worried.
The woman believed that Bobby was hoping she'd help him dispose of the gun.
But when they got to this young girl's house, she told them, you can get in your car and leave, I don't want to be a part of this. To which they got out of her car, got in Bobby's car, and then left.
Any logical person who was thinking about disposing of a firearm would try and dispose of it in another way to make sure that it was safely disposed of, whether it was thrown into a lake or a river or something. But to give possession of it to someone else who he didn't know was an extremely risky tactic. And in this case, it backfired because that person was the one that reported it to the police.
The witness was keen to give John as much information as she could to track down Bobby.
In talking to this waitress, she couldn't give me the last name, and that's the one thing that I really needed. So it was a situation where she could only remember something that related to the name. She told me the name sounded maybe French, it might have had an L or an S in it, or it might have reminded her of a fish or something like that. She knew that he'd been laid off or fired from a job at some pay and pack or pack and save, some sort of business up there in the Bay Area, but she didn't really have any other details that would help us.
In addition to Bobby making claims about hoping that he had shot the right guy, there was also some small talk that was a bit disjointed and not really complete, involving Bobby doing this shooting as a retaliation because he had been shot at a night or 2 earlier before the shooting while down in Modesto.
My understanding is that the night before, he had been in an argument with a guy over another girl that he was trying to date, and they both liked, and some guy fired some shots over his head to warn him to leave him alone.
This was certainly a big break in the case because at this point, without this young girl calling, I wouldn't really have had much to do other than possibly eat a donut or have some coffee.
John now had another lead to chase down, the girl involved in the argument between Bobby and another guy. They believe she worked in the diner chain, Denny's, and it was her friend who had fired a shot at Bobby.
Then we drove back to Modesto. We wanted to go to that Denny's restaurant, and as luck would have it, we got there, and we found a waitress that knew of Bobby, but she also confirmed for us that she'd gotten in an argument with this Bobby.
John now compiled all the info he had on Bobby in the hope of finding him.
There were enough small details, such as the L and the S in his name, and that it sounded French and it reminded somebody of a fish, and that he worked at this store and he got laid off for fighting.
Bobby's ex-place of work was their best lead so far. Tracking it down became their #1 priority.
He was unemployed, I think, at the time of the shooting. He had worked at a pack and save somewhere.
Well, in 1994, it wasn't really too difficult to figure out how many pack and save stores there were in the South Bay area of San Francisco. And so we were able to just look those up in a directory, and we just started calling the different stores. The Sunnyvale Pack and Save was the next store that we called, and luckily we got a hold of a manager there that knew of Bobby and knew that he'd been laid off for fighting with another employee. So he was able to give us information about Bobby's identity, his true name, his address, his phone number, and his date of birth from the employment records.
It looked like the team had now found their suspect.
What we found out is that the guy Bobby was actually Bobby Lesturgeon, Lesturgeon. Now, Lesturgeon can kind of sound French with the Lee part, and a sturgeon, of course, is a fish. That's where they get caviar. So Bobby Lesturgeon, it fit exactly with what both the waitresses said.
A picture was emerging of Bobby's life and why he was in Modesto the night of Sulu's shooting.
Lesturgeon, Bobby, Robert, whatever they call him, he lived over in San Jose, and he would come to Modesto to go to the bars and try and pick up women here.
John tracked down Bobby's driving license, which had a photo on it. They had their man.
And we showed that photo to the waitress from the steak restaurant, and she immediately recognized that was Bobby. And even though the photo didn't have his name on it, she said, yeah, that's absolutely him. So we asked her if she would mind if we were able to put a phone recorder on her telephone. And that way, if he called, she would be able to record the calls. And she said, certainly. She agreed to that without hesitation. And I asked her, I said, well, do you think he will call? And she said, well, if I page him, he'll call.
The trap was set. If John and the team could get Bobby on the phone talking about the shooting, they would have all the evidence they needed to arrest him. They hoped they were now tantalizingly close to catching Sulu's killer. In downtown Modesto, California, 22-year-old basketball player Sulu Palega from San Francisco had been shot dead in a motiveless drive-by shooting.
When there is a murder that goes unexplained and it goes unanswered, that's what shocks our community. Because most murders are husbands, wives, most domestic.
He was only in Modesto to compete in a church basketball festival.
You're just in shock. You're kind of numb. You just don't know what to say, you know. He was one of our basketball players, so that was important.
Two local waitresses had helped police identify the killer, a man named Bobby Lesturgeon from nearby Livermore.
It didn't seem like Bobby and his two friends were gangsters or somebody that does drive-by shootings frequently. It was hard to know for sure, but the mere fact that Bobby didn't turn off either of these two waitresses and they seemed somewhat interested in him showed that he might have had some good tendencies and he might have been boyfriend material. But of course, what he did kind of took him out of that category.
Detective John Bueller and his team had convinced one of the waitresses to get in contact with Bobby and record her phone calls, hoping he would discuss the murder.
Once they get a suspect like that and they have somebody they know, they tap the line and have the witness call the person and try and get them to give themselves up, not knowing, of course, that the police are listening in.
The witness was clearly critically important to that investigation, and the police peers wouldn't have known where to begin had that witness not come forward.
True to her word, the waitress paged Bobby, and when he called her back, she recorded the call.
I said, how you doing?
Fine, how are you?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh.
She'd paged Bobby, and of course he responded. And he called back, and they got in a conversation.
You any better?
Yeah, a lot better.
The last time we talked?
Yeah, I guess that's just that day.
I guess.
He didn't tell her everything yet, but she started asking him, what went on the other night? Why did you come to my house?
You tell him that either?
No, I didn't say nothing.
Why?
What am I going to tell him?
Well, he had to come over. He shot somebody.
What were you doing with the gun and what's going on? And of course, by this time, she knew that he'd done the shooting. And so he started giving bits of information that only somebody who had done the shooting would know.
I just couldn't figure out, I was trying to figure out why you shot him, you know?
And over the next several days, what it revealed is that the shooting was done because it was a mistaken identity. Bobby had actually been looking for the guy that had shot at him the prior night, on that Thursday night after he'd got in the argument with the Denny's waitress.
Because, I told her, I'm looking for them. So then we took off and went somewhere else, and then we drove back by Denny's, and there's these dudes standing off, and when we drove by, they put their hands out, and they're like, what's up, what's up?
I listened to the recording. The guy basically admitted that he did it.
They now had Bobby's account of what had happened that Friday night.
Bobby is driving past in his car, going the opposite direction away from us. Sulu, along with Michael and Anthony, are walking towards us. And it was at that time that Bobby saw Sulu and thought he was the guy that had shot at him a couple of nights earlier. So he didn't want to let this guy get away with it. So he continued on up the road here until he got to a large discount store. Now that store was closed at 2 o'clock in the morning, but Bobby pulled into the parking lot, which was vacant. There was nobody around. Bobby gets out of the car, goes to the trunk, gets the gun, puts a magazine in it, runs the slide back, chambers around, gets in the back seat behind the driver.
So then we went around, and I got my gloves on and got my out the trunk and got in the back seat. We drove back by, and they were still there. Right when we came around the corner, they saw my car. They were, what's up, what's up? I said, what's up? And then I let one off, and I guess it hit him in the head.
God.
He ended up shooting the gun, and it ended up hitting the one victim and killed him.
We got straight on the freeway, headed to your house.
No, hold on, there's another line.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah.
Right off, that's the police department. I got really tied up.
Yeah, guess what?
What?
He's on the other line.
Oh.
John and the team now had what was effectively a confession on tape.
Throughout all these phone calls, Bobby was still trying to romance her, wanting to get together and things like that. But as time went by, he freely talked about using a specialty gun with specialty ammunition, and that the gun is already destroyed. They'd thrown it off a bridge or gotten rid of the gun and it was already gone.
It's gone. Gone, gone, gone. That's why you use a gun like that.
She had also told me that they were talking about going to New York City very soon. So we knew the time was getting limited as to what we had to do next.
They had to find Bobby, and fast. John felt they had enough to arrest him for the murder of Sulu.
Bobby said that he was glad that he'd actually shot the wrong guy, because if he had shot the guy that he was going after, there would have been a connection. And that connection would have led detectives like us to Bobby. But because there was no obvious connection in any way between Sulu and Bobby, the chances of us solving that case were almost nil.
Throughout California, The drive-by shooting was starting to attract a lot of media interest, and the pressure was growing to catch the killer.
There were radio call-in shows in the San Francisco Bay Area that were talking about this case that happened 90 miles away in Modesto, because Sulu's family was so prominent, and Sulu was such a young, good guy that didn't contribute to this. People were calling into these radio shows saying that the guy who did this shooting should be killed himself.
People were calling and wishing I'd die. Slow and painful death.
So Bobby was feeling pressure from this. And as time went by, Bobby ended up getting involved in a hit-and-run traffic collision. He was in his girlfriend's car and he ran into a U.S. Postal Service truck. And then he took off. And it was at that time that we had to start accelerating our game plan to put together the arrests.
They knew Bobby lived in nearby Livermore, but as yet, didn't have his address.
Now, in the tapes, we had learned from listening to the waitress that Bobby lived across the street from a fire station, because at one time in the tape, you could hear sirens in the background when the waitress and Bobby were speaking.
It's not a real time to be thinking logically about things.
Oh, I hear sirens. What's that?
I live across the street from a fire station.
Oh, do you?
Yep.
The team also identified the addresses of the two other people who were in the car the night of the shooting. But John and Dick took on the job of going after Bobby.
But we were able to just sit out there and watch his house until he came out of the house.
Detective John Bueller decided they wanted to catch Bobby off guard and arrest him.
When we were there doing the stakeout, we got there early in the morning, I think about 5 o'clock, so hopefully Bobby was still in bed.
We sat there from early in the morning, about 6 in the morning, until about little after 10 o'clock, waiting for Bobby to come out.
When he came out of the house, we were not that far from him. We drew our guns, told him he was under arrest, and he didn't give us any trouble. Got him down on the ground, handcuffed him, and then we were able to put him in a patrol car.
John and Dick had their prime suspect in custody, and news quickly spread.
I was told about the arrest the day they made it. These guys work fast. They knew what they wanted to do, and they just go over and get him and brought him back and then started, interrogating him.
He thought we were postal inspectors and had caught him for that hit-and-run traffic collision. Now, a traffic collision is kind of important, but in the scale of comparison with a murder, a traffic collision is down here with no injuries, and the murder is right up here at the pinnacle. So we told Bobby then, well, we're not postal inspectors. We're Modesto homicide detectives. We showed him our badge, and you're under arrest for the drive-by shooting. The expression on his face changed instantly. I wish I could describe it, but there's limits on the English language that would put it into perspective. To say that he was shocked would be an understatement. And that was pretty much it.
Bobby was charged with the murder of Sulu. But he wasn't the only arrest made that morning. The police also went after the two passengers in the car, Mark and Vincent.
And at the same time we were doing that, we had a similar group of detectives that were going to do the same thing at Mark's house in Livermore. So as we did the simultaneous arrests and the search warrants, they went and had a stakeout going on Vince's house. And when he came out of his house and got in his car, that's when they grabbed him up also.
But with Bobby already denying everything, it was up to John to put together a case to prove murder. In Modesto, Californian detectives John Bueller and Dick Rydenor had arrested 3 suspects for the killing of basketball player Sulu Palega. He was an innocent victim of a drive-by shooting.
Sometimes when we drive past there, I do think about it, but, it's always with compassion for Sulu and his family. Well, maybe God needed another good basketball player.
Yeah.
In a time like this, you don't know. Our faith definitely helped us to get through each day.
The shooting had shaken up the whole city, especially as it seemed like a totally random killing.
Always a sense of relief when there's an arrest, especially in the community, because everybody follows it. We were a small community. We played the story up and everybody was interested, and when they did make the arrest, it's like, really, okay, it's nobody from Modesto.
The prime suspect, Bobby Lesturgeon, had been arrested outside his home several days after the shooting.
So he was transported to the police station, and we ended up meeting the other officers over there, and that's when we first decided to do the interview with him to see if he would talk to us. Not expecting whatsoever that he would, pretty much expecting that he wouldn't. We had him talking on tape about doing the murder, so we really didn't need an admission, although we would love that.
With the suspect, I pretty much just let him tell me about everything that was going on.
While Deputy Dick Reidner questioned Bobby, John had a new target in his sights.
It was that same afternoon after Bobby was arrested in Santa Clara that Dick Reidner and I returned here to this building. And when we went inside there, we found that the right front passenger that didn't do anything about shooting, didn't have anything to do with that, his name was Mark, he was inside the interview room in there, the same interview room where I'd interviewed Anthony and Michael.
John decided that in order to get Bobby behind bars for Sulu's murder, he'd make Mark an offer.
The offer that we talked about there with the district attorney's approval was that we would drop the charges that we had already sought against Mark in connection with this case, as long as he came forward, testified truthfully, gave us a complete statement, and would agree to testify in front of the jury in court. And as long as he fulfilled that stuff, we would dismiss the charges against him because he did not pull the trigger, he did not supply the gun, and he was much more valuable to us to make the case that much stronger.
Who better to tell you what happened than one of the other people that was there, that was involved, that went to the scene with the shooter, that drove the car, that has intimate knowledge of what happened, where, when and how. And of course there's a huge incentive for the suspect to cooperate with police, because then they are not going to go to prison for a very long time.
With Mark testifying against Bobby and the recorded confession, John was ready to go to court.
It went to trial. In fact, this guy is such a bad dude. It was a few days before his trial, or maybe even the day before, he and another inmate made an escape attempt from the jail. They took a guard hostage and held this jail-fashioned knife to his throat, cut him a little bit, and they were trying to get to the roof. They had some makeshift rope that they thought they could throw over the side. The jail staff was able to thwart that and take him into custody.
Once in the dock, Bobby was still pleading his innocence.
I think his defense was mistaken identity. That's the only thing he had, is he didn't mean to do it. He was trying to scare him, but, you know, he hit the guy right in the face.
John didn't want to leave anything to chance and had documented every stage of the investigation.
In America, generally we don't have the jury leave the courtroom during the trial. Sometimes it happens in a case depending on what the case is, but generally the jury is going to stay in the jury box, in the courtroom for the length of the trial. But in this case, I didn't know how they would view this, and I didn't know how they could conjure this up in their head. So in addition to the hand-drawn diagram that we did of the street and the crime scene, I had the fire department come out here with one of their ladder trucks. Now the ladder will extend up about 75 feet. And so I got on that ladder dressed like this with a 35mm camera, and I snapped a series of photographs from up high above to show the layout of the street, Sulu's motel, and the direction that Sulu and Michael and Anthony were coming from. So that way, in the jury, I could introduce those photos to the jury so they would actually see in photographs what it was like out there.
The killer piece of evidence, however, was the recordings made by the waitress Bobby had been trying to date.
We knew the tapes would be used in court and they would be accepted in court because it was legal for us to put the recorder on the waitress's phone. She agreed to it, she had knowledge of it, and that's all we needed in California when we were working a murder case to be able to make it legal.
Everything hung on these tapes, and the strategy also had other risks.
I listened to the tapes of these calls, and of course I had to turn the tapes in so that they could be transcribed so you could actually read the parts of the call and how it came about. And in all these phone calls with this young waitress, she was just a spectacular little actress.
That night was just an exception, I guess.
Oh, it's just an exception. So would you do it ever again?
What, shoot someone?
Yeah.
If I had to.
And she was kind of threatened a couple of times. Bobby had said words to the effect of, keep your mouth closed or I'll close it for you. And
my friends would be pissed. Somebody snitched me out and I had to go to prison for life?
Yeah.
I feel very bad for that person.
Why? Like, what are you going to do to that person?
I wouldn't do nothing. I'd be in prison. I wouldn't do nothing.
He kind of made these implied threats that she better not cause any problems or she could end up the same way that Sulu did. But throughout all of it, she maintained her composure, she maintained her strength, and she maintained her patience and brought us some of the greatest stuff that we could have for this case.
Why? What are you going to do? Kill me like you did him?
Oh, that ain't cool. That ain't funny.
Often informants are targeted, witnesses in cases are targeted. So it does take a huge amount of bravery to give information to the police, to stand up, especially if you're then expected to go to court and stand there and give evidence. So this lady should be applauded for coming forward and giving that information to the police.
When Bobby's time in court came in May 1995, all the hard work paid off.
Well, in California, it's not unusual for there to be a year or so between the arrest and when somebody goes to trial. And in this case, that's what we had. The trial didn't take place until May of the following year. And of course, it went for several days, but it wasn't a difficult decision, I don't think, for the jury because they didn't deliberate for too long. When you have the killer talking about the murder and you have it on tape and you play that in court, there really isn't much place for the killer to go. He's kind of stuck with that.
I'm sure someone's going to come around and get me soon. I'm sure I'll pay for this somehow, some way.
We didn't have any other information that was out there that would help the defense bring up some reasonable doubt. And that's really what they need to get a not guilty, is they just need to have one of those 12 jurors think that, no, I don't think he did it. But in this case, there really wasn't any reasonable doubt. And it wasn't because we did such great work, it's because of the things that the waitress did to help us and Bobby's own words. Those are the things that really made this case come together.
He pled not guilty at first, and then he was found guilty. They sentenced him to like 35 or 36 years. So he won't be getting out for a while. And if he does get out, he'll probably cause more problems.
With Sulu's killer behind bars, the Modesto church who ran the basketball tournament wanted to ensure that he was remembered by the community for the right reasons.
We came back the year after that because we did not want it to end on that kind of a note, and had a very good rally in 1995, and that was the last year.
In Sulu's hometown of San Francisco, the park where he had played basketball was named after him and opened by his father.
We finally named something after somebody that everybody knew, and this is Palega Park.
For John and the team, Sulu was more than just another murder case.
Sulu's case was unique because it was one of those somewhat rare cases where the victim had nothing to do with his murder. He didn't contribute to it, he didn't provoke it, he just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. We were lucky that we were able to find Bobby and determine who he was from the limited information we had. So at that point, it was a good outcome for a very, very tragic, senseless, wasteful murder.